watch the recording. So thank you. Great. Okay, so we are in week 3, and hopefully your work that you did with your homework on your key financial statements is going to kind of play out into this next conversation. So I wanted to start by just asking you what's on the top of your mind tonight regarding your search for land. So what are some of the things you're thinking about now?
Well, I'm thinking it's going to be hard to find land or to really to properly evaluate it when it's covered with snow. But I'm going to look at it anyway this weekend. But that's probably top of mind for me. Is it's winter time, right? So
yeah, exactly. And I think next week Diane's going to talk a little bit, and you can ask her specific questions about people that did buy land when it was a off season and didn't actually understand what that land actually looked like, how much marsh is on that land,
yeah,
how much snow it has. And so absolutely, that's definitely something to think about. And at the end of today's class, I'll point out a resource where you can really start to evaluate the community though that surrounds that land. So when you are doing a site visit, there are some other things you can look at. It's definitely good to see it in winter. And in those shoulder seasons, you can also see some of the environmental considerations, like do you have potential runoff? How deep is the snow? Do you have kind of low boggy areas? Are there some frost pockets? Those types of things will reveal themselves as well. What things are other folks thinking about? What's on the top of your mind?
I get pretty hung up on long-term stuff, but being picky about wanting to see in the future and not wanting to see a bunch of big houses on the hilltops in a place where I'm just scraping to get by and have invested in, and I'm happy there, but I get nervous about that because I don't want to end up being grumpy.
It's good to think about that.
And also what the neighbors around, if I wanted to grow, if trying to figure out if they would be open to leasing land like right around the place that we're looking at. Yeah.
So those are good conversations to have now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Other things that are on the top of folks' mind.
Even prior to last week's homework, I had been talking with my holistic management mentor, and we're pretty, it's pretty clear that financials and really digging deep into my financials and having a good 3 to 5 year projection is probably my next step.
Holly, what's on the top of your mind tonight?
Well, at the moment, cost. Where we are, the cost of land has skyrocketed because everybody wants to get out of the city and move here, and it's not necessarily to farm. And so the amount of arable land around here that's being developed, well, and even in 2009, when the last recession hit, there were so many plots of large tracts of land that were purchased from farmers and turned into streets and infrastructure that eventually end up with no homes on them because there was a bubble. And I think we're headed into that again. Cost of everything around here is just crazy.
And that would be the second thing that's on my mind.
Absolutely. I told you that I'm helping my son look for land. So we're watching land prices, and I was looking at this one piece of land on Zillow and looking at their projections. And one thing that was really interesting is that they projected the land was worth like $213,000 right now, but in March that it would be worth $180,000. And so, we talked in that first session about we're in this kind of strange blip in the pandemic and people have been looking for a lot of land. And I really think that that's one of the things to be mindful of is like, where are we? Are we going on an up trajectory, or could it be buying quite high? And, the landscape's a bit unknown, but there might be some folks that you can put, together on your team that's supporting you. And I would think, maybe even talking to agricultural appraisers. So there's companies that appraise ag land, and talk to them about what their trends they're seeing and kind of what they think is going to happen with the market, or investment advisors that are looking at those types of things. Hi, Marcy.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We're just touching base on what's on the top of everybody's mind coming into tonight's class.
I heard you discussing price of land, and I'll tell you something that just happened very recently with the land trust, in that we applied for a grant for a piece of property that was valued at a certain price, and then we were awarded the grant, and then part of that process of buying it, we get what's called a yellow book appraisal, which uses stricter standards, and it came back at $60,000 more than what we thought it was going to be. So we're having to come up with that money. So just know that things can change. And one of the things that we did do is we locked in what's called a option to purchase and sale agreement, the amount that the owners signed ahead of time that said, we'll pay somewhere between A and B. And so we actually capped out what we would pay. So if the market fluctuated, we were locked in. And I think that's something for people to think about if it's going to take a little bit of time for you to buy some land with the individual. Now, we're not going through a realtor, and maybe they have different things, but thank goodness we had this option to purchase and sale agreement with limits, a floor and a ceiling on what we would pay that the owner agreed to.
Absolutely. Hi, Leah and Tyler, can you hear us tonight?
Yeah, we can. Sorry, we delivered a load of grass hay today, so we're in the truck again.
Okay, great.
But I'll let Tyler tell you what's on the top of our mind right now.
Okay.
I guess for us, I'll echo what a lot of has already been said is price. At least in our area, we've seen a huge influx of people moving from California that want little ranchettes or things like that, hobby ranch type farm things, or even a lot of rural development where they want to live out in the country but they don't have any intention of doing anything really with the land. Farmers are selling that their farm ground for retirement. You have a lot of Californians coming here, used to buying and paying for land at California prices, and they come here and they think it's cheap, but for here it's expensive. And so because of that, it's driven the market up for farmland, and it's getting to the point where it's hard to find a piece of farm ground to buy and to be able to cash flow it based on the crop or commodity that you produce on that ground itself. And so a lot of the bigger farmers are able to do it because they are able to spread their economies of scale thinner. They have other ground that's paid for. And so they're able to spread their expenses out over that piece of ground that, somebody without those resources wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We, Mackenzie and I are working with another colleague. We're doing a lot of focus groups with women farmers throughout this month. And we did one this morning, and one of the women farmers who does holistic management, they have a ranch. She said that she really felt that where they are at, they could not be financially successful and profitable if they looked to buy all their land. They had to be in a situation where they were leasing at least some land. So I've seen a lot of that where there's a home property that's smaller, and then looking at leases just because of what you're talking about. There's not the ability to make a return on that land investment right now. So I think this is a great conversation.
And that goes back with.
Go ahead, Leah.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that's the part where it's hard for us though, you know, because with what we're wanting to do next with the feed yard, we have to purchase the ground and put the improvements on it to generate the cash. And so it has to be a purchase piece.
It's a huge upfront capital expense to be able to do that.
And it'll cash flow, but you've got to find the piece that's small enough for the feed yard without the farm ground to be able to afford that part initially. So it's just finding the right spot really for us, and then probably we're just gonna have to reach out to individuals with ground that's not even on the market. That's what we're gonna have to do.
Sure. Okay, one more person to check in with. Zach, what's on the top of your mind regarding your land search today?
Well, I'm not ready to buy it, you know, up until the next year. I have a few savings before the pandemic, and I just checked my credit score, and I was looking around my neighbor for the Craigslist and Fables, and I think you know, by the end of this year, I think I was able to buy it. But now all my saving is gone. My restaurant is closed, and then I have no idea, you know, uncertain future, and I would like to listen to what you guys from the conversation, and then from conversation how to start out. Since I'm a language barrier, second language, and let me not speak about how to find the land. You know, I do a little bit of research.
Yeah, definitely such a challenging time for your primary business right now with the restaurant. Absolutely. Well, I think maybe when Jesika comes on at 5, we should ask her some of what she's seen about the trends in land and land prices, and what she would recommend about thinking about how those trends are going to play out in the near future and longer term. So the second thing I wanted to spend a few minutes on tonight is reflecting on the land tenure story. So we heard Emily's story last year, and I'm hoping that you had an opportunity to check out some more of the case studies that are on the e-extension classroom. So what are you thinking about these stories? What are they revealing for you? And what are you thinking about the journeys that other people have taken?
They're younger than I am.
Right, you know, one thing I did hear Emily say, you know, I think when they first started looking for land, they knew they liked to farm, but they didn't know that they were actually going to be in a situation where they were going to want to make their full living on the farm. And that's quite a transition that's happening right now, and figuring out how to successfully do that to make enough income. And I think it's amazing the transition from a market garden to an on-farm brewery. Like, it's really astounding.
Well, and that's certainly something that stood out to me and that I can relate to just from, you know, my scope of how much my scope changed just from going into college. You know, you go into an endeavor having one idea of what it's going to look like, and you just got to be prepared for it to change. And I think Emily's story last week was certainly a testament to that.
I think there's a lot for me that comes back to oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
That first week when you said putting together a team, so there was a story about the farmers in Montana. I think it was 2 different people, and what they were finally able to do was find ground that had been in CRP contracts for years, and then was not being renewed. So for them, it was just a connection to the community and knowing the farmers that were not renewed, or the landowners that I think probably didn't even live there anymore and didn't want to go through the work to find someone to lease the land to. So it was up for sale. And then same with Jesika McAleese's story.
Mhm.
I thought it was really clever how she got her local land trust to kind of buy in with her and front her or loan her money to get that started and do the purchase, which I mean, I really like that idea of just get the investment in the community in your business plan with like a stable, like a land trust, which I thought was a really, yeah, that was inspiring, I thought, to hear that.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I may stop by Lone Mountain tomorrow because I'm going over this weekend, and I'm starting on a list of questions to ask Emily. But I think in the case studies I looked at, I mean, the one thing that stands out to me is just the perseverance that's needed. Obviously, you need that once you get the land, right? Everybody knows that working your farm is not easy work, right? Nobody goes in because it's a cush job, right? But it's the perseverance just in every step of the way.
Absolutely.
In finding it, then the whole purchase process, the loan, the business case, and then once you get it, it's just another series of challenges, right? It's a perseverance in all of those stories that really stood out for me.
Yeah, I agree. And, and the importance of figuring out what the must-haves are and what would be nice, but is not 100% required.
Right.
Is everybody compromised on what it was that they got in some way, or found that they had a challenge that they didn't anticipate that they needed to deal with. And I think that's part of the challenge with Emily and Luke's place is that, they have a lot of county rules that they have to navigate through and get changed or variances on so that they can do what they want to do on the land for what it's zoned for currently if they bought it. So, absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit or a lot about leasing land. So a lease really is a contract between the landlord and the tenant. And in addition to identifying the parties, and we say parties because it could be that there's multiple landlords associated with a piece of land that you're leasing, or you could be in a partnership and have multiple tenants that are outside of your immediate family. So it's really identifying who those parties are, and then what rights the owner is transferring to the tenant to use that property. And then how those rights are going to come back to the owner at the end of the lease term. And so that's a really interesting way to think about leases, is a transfer of rights to use a piece of property. And key elements are always a property description, the length of the term of the lease, and the payment and terms and rental rate. And we're going to go through a whole host of other aspects of a really good lease. Leases can be oral or written. We talked about this before, but one thing that's really interesting is that oftentimes if leases are over 1 year, state law can require that they are written. So there are some provisions out there that you'll need to look at based on Idaho state law, or if you end up in another state, the laws of those states. Written leases provide security and clarity for both parties. They require signatures and they create obligations for the term of that lease. And handshake leases are valid, but usually they're only for a year, and they offer few protections for you as the person who is leasing that land, and they offer few protections overall for the landowner as well. So leases, as I said, they come with rights. And so for the tenant, that's the right to use the property and potentially other things that are on the property in terms of infrastructure, but that needs to be clear in a lease. What is available for use? Another point of clarity needs to be whether or not the person with the tenant is able to transfer that lease to another party. Oftentimes that is not something that a landowner owner would like to see happen. Also, what is the privacy? Who has access to that land? What is the notice? What privacy do they have about what they're doing with that piece of property? For the landlord, leases often spell out how they can sell or transfer the property within the time period of that lease, and whether or not that affects the terms of the lease. And so if you know that land is for sale, that's when some things might be written into the lease that could potentially lose your rights to use that land in certain ways if the land is actually sold. So definitely something to think about. They also might spell out that the property owner can take out a mortgage on that piece of land. They can sell or donate part of it, particularly in the terms of a conservation easement. So they still are spelling out what rights that property owner is retaining. And then the property owner can exclude entry to others. So the property owner might say, you can lease this land, but you cannot allow hunting on the land. And so that's an example of an exclusion that they could do. They could also have exclusion of overnight stays on the land, or the types of vehicles that you would be able to bring on the land. Like, can you have ATVs? Would they allow you to bring camping trailers or some type of other temporary living structure to the land? All of these things would be spelled out into the lease. Public policies may affect the rights that a landlord and a tenant would like to convey to one another. So states govern property rights, and they have statutes that deal with ag leases. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that they might require a written lease after 1 year. They might also have statutes that identify things like who's responsible for noxious weed management. What happens if there is a fire or other natural disaster on that piece of property, and how does that affect whether or not rent is going to be able to be collected? So it's definitely important to understand how property rights are impacted in a lease situation by the state. Local governments generally regulate land use through ordinances and zoning. And so again, looking at what those different options are that you can do in terms of your lease agreement. Tribal governments may have other policies affecting land use, especially if that land is owned by the tribe. And if you are renting tribal land, you'll definitely want to understand whether or not rules within the state affect any of that tribal land, because that can be, as we've talked about before, something that is a bit confusing on where jurisdiction lies. Federal laws can further limit the rights and really may override state and local authority, for instance, with the Endangered Species Act or the Clean Water Act. So when you identify a piece of land that you want to lease, it's really important to still understand all of the rules that impact that land. We talked a little bit in past weeks about the types of leases, cash leases, different types of share agreements, and ground leases. And so we're going to jump into those in more detail now. So when we think about cash leases, this is the most simple lease, which is one of the great things about it. It allows for really easy budgeting and record keeping because the tenants make all the production decisions. They receive all the payments for the products that are grown on that land. And oftentimes they also include the government payments. So if part of that land is in something like CRP, that the tenant will actually receive that payment. Some of the cons to this situation is that the tenants assume all the risk, and that cash flow issue that we talked about last week could be an issue depending upon if the rent is due throughout the growing season. And rental rates can be volatile, and they might need to be set every year within a cash lease. And so those are some of the challenges that can exist. If we look at crop or livestock share leases, again, these are the leases where there's a partnership between the landowner and the tenant, and they are sharing essentially the production and the production costs and the income from the enterprises on the farm. And so in this situation, there can be less cash outflow because the landowner can be assuming some of those costs of operation or maintenance and upkeep of inputs. And then the tenant doesn't have to carry all that themselves. And then when the product is sold, that money is divided between the two parties. But one of the challenges is that both the landowner and the tenant have to track the costs, and they have to be transparent in what those costs are and have a really good working relationship for that. And so it does require more cooperation and a very close relationship between the landlord and tenant so that they're really making joint decisions. It moves it from more of an independent enterprise to a cooperative enterprise. Now, flex leases are very similar to these crop share or livestock share leases. They can be longer term, but usually the difference is that they look at yields and markets in terms of how they identify how much is being paid by the property owner and the tenant. So they're a little bit more complex. And that means that if you're basing your lease on your yield, then you have to agree on what that yield is and the market value of that yield, which can be variable depending on what you're choosing in terms of how you're going to market that crop. So again, it's the next level of collaboration. Ground leases, we talked about those. These are those 50 to 99-year leases. They do have more security in terms of building equity and improvements that you, when you invest in soil health and things like that, that is returnable to you. They can be renewed and they can be inherited, which is great if you have heirs that you want to have access to that property, but they're really relatively untested for agriculture. And when they end, there's no guarantee that they will be renewed. And so in terms of having some type of investment where you are able to sell that investment or leave that to family or an heir, that may not be something that is long-term for them. There's also leases with options to purchase. And so in the options to purchase, sometimes those options are simply if the landowner decides to sell, then the tenant has the first right to make an offer on that property. Other options to purchase can include, this is what we are willing to sell this property for. If you have a certain amount of time that you pay rent and you can make a decision on whether or not you want to buy this property within that time frame, and perhaps some of that rent is going to count towards the sale. But all of these things have to be spelled out within the lease very clearly. So they can apply to just the land, or they can apply to the land and some of the infrastructure that is on that land. One of the key things that we found is that landowners have really various motivations for leasing land. And so understanding those motivations is really key to having a conversation and setting a price in a lease agreement situation. So a retired farmer might want to be able to age in place and be able to stay on their land, but see the land managed in agriculture. Sometimes one of the challenges is that that retired farmer may have a very defined set of ideas about the best use of that land and the best type of agricultural production system. And so it can be relatively inflexible and cause conflict. Non-farming landlords might be unfamiliar with agriculture and conservation practices, so not understanding why something is done on the farm. And so that can cause challenges. On the other hand, they can also be very strong proponents of certain conservation practices and be willing to co-invest in those. We talked a little bit early on about, in previous weeks, about institutional or public agencies that own land. And again, those are different provisions that they might have on how the landscape needs to be managed according to the policies or beliefs of that institution or agency. So what's really important here is to understand those motivations and be really clear about them before entering into an agreement. So there's just a huge list of really important things to include in a good lease. And one of the ways to really explore what a lease entails and what you want to have in a lease is start to make a list of all of these types of things that you would want to discuss. And you may be able to find some lease documents that you would be able to look at as examples, but you might have to add different provisions depending on what you want to do with that land. And so it's most likely that if you are entering into a lease agreement, that you're going to want to engage in the services of a professional, somebody who understands agriculture and understands leasing, so that you have another set of eyes that can look at that lease and go over the provisions of it with you. So things that are covered in a good lease. So definitely identification of the parties, we already talked about that, and a property description. The length of the lease, including termination and renewal provisions. And one thing that a lease can have is an automatic renewal provision that if, within 30 days of the expiring of the lease, if nobody requests changes to the lease, that it automatically renews. Payment arrangements and rental rates. So if you do want to have a different payment arrangement based on your cash flow, that can be written into the lease. And then details on who's responsible for what maintenance and improvements. Conservation provisions ought to also be included in the lease. And then what restrictions the landlord might be putting on use of that property or other special provisions. For instance, perhaps there's going to be access points that the landowner is going to want to access that property to get to a different piece, or there's going to be multiple tenants on that property and there needs to be some agreements about shared use of infrastructure like irrigation access points, other things like that that will need to be covered in the lease. So with the property description, it's really important that that is detailed, and the more you can detail it, the better. And so you want the boundaries, you want to identify the acres, which aspects of the land you're going to be able to use, access to water, irrigation, water rights, ponds. This is a picture of a piece of land that's in rural Latah County that a landowner had contacted me and said that they would really like to have somebody come and lease it. And this particular landowner is really invested in conservation. So on this property, while there's a pond there, somebody who is leasing this land would not have access to the pond, and they would want that pond to be fenced off from livestock. So there's things like that that need to be known up front in talking about access to water and what's available and what's not. So it's not safe to assume that because it's there that you would be able to use it. Also looking at agricultural infrastructure, barns, fencing, irrigation, what can you use and what would you be responsible for repairing? And then if there's housing on site, would that be available? One of the things that I would recommend is that if you are going to into a lease agreement, that you would photo document the condition of the land and the buildings and the infrastructure when you went into that lease, so that you not only have a visual description of the property, but you also have actual image descriptions of the property. So if there was any question about whether something existed, the condition of it at some time during the lease, you would have documentation to show what it was like. You might also consider making a map of the property, identifying where things are and making specific notes about what is accessible and what is not, especially if there's multiple people using that particular piece of land. Some of the things to think about in time frame is that the length of your lease should really be tied to your personal and professional goals. And if you're thinking that you know, you're going to be in a multi-step approach to building some financial history with your farm enterprises because you want to move into like an FSA loan situation, then maybe you're going to be looking at short year-to-year, less than 3-year leases because you want to have an opportunity to build that financial information, but not over obligate yourself. But if you know that you're going to need to invest in building soil quality or infrastructure, you may really want to negotiate a longer lease so that you have more time to get a return on that investment. A few other considerations, is subletting allowed? So I talked about transfer of that lease. What are the tenants right there? But would you be allowed to sublet part of that property to another producer? Or if you're leasing an entire farm, could you sublet the home to someone else if you didn't want to live on that property? Are there any exclusions based on the landowner's preferences or requirements on the types of crops or livestock that you can grow? We talked a lot about maintenance before. Who's responsible? Sometimes routine maintenance, which is maintenance that would have to happen anyway, regardless of whether or not you were leasing the land. Maybe that is something that you'd ask the landlord to be required to do, but you would be responsible for things that you're having more wear and tear on. So who will pay and own the improvements on the land is really important. Before I go on to talking a little bit about payment arrangements and rate, are there any questions or comments about provisions of a lease? There is a document in the online classroom that you can, in the lease section, where you can actually take a sample lease. So it's an exercise with a sample lease and a whole bunch of questions. And if you're thinking about leasing land, would be really beneficial to do that exercise, because what it will ask you to do is to go into a lease document or to find additional lease documents on the web and find all these different provisions within the document so you can become really familiar with the types of things that are in a lease and where you would find them. So a little bit about payment arrangements and rental rates. This is where I think the business becomes super tricky. And it is going to require a negotiation with the landowner. So when you go into things like the National Ag Statistics Service, you can get information for different parts of the country, for different counties, on what the ag rental rates are. They gather that data and update it every year. And so the spreadsheet was quite large. So I just took a screenshot of a portion of the spreadsheet. So the most current year for data is up here. And then you can go back and you can see how these general cash rent for cropland, whether it's irrigated or non-irrigated, is at a county level. And so that kind of gives you a ballpark of what's happening out there. But again, that ballpark is within the agricultural community. So if you're looking to lease land from somebody that is not involved in agriculture, they might not understand these rental rates. And they may be asking, at least initially, for a rate that's really out of the ballpark financially for you and for agriculture in general. So knowing what you can afford to pay to go in and being able to get some background data about what are the average rates that we would see in this county for this type of ag land, that can help you within that negotiation. The key factors that are really affecting lease rates these days are definitely location and competition for that land. And as we talked at the beginning of class today, and you're all experiencing competition for land from, in many cases, people that are not going to use land for agricultural purposes. Some of the other things are the soil productivity. Water is a key factor now for any ag land. And if you have established water rights, that land is going to be more expensive to lease and or buy. The improvements on the land, so if it does have the infrastructure you need and the condition of those improvements. And then another big one to think about is the landowner's needs and wishes, but also their taxes. Because if they are a non-farming landowner that owns ag land, they may really want to lease that land because it's going to decrease the tax burden that they have on that land. And that might be a place that you can really have a conversation with a landowner and be able to get access to that land in a partnership where they are considering that the return on that lease is not just what you're paying, but it's what they're saving. So thinking about those types of conversations. And I really do think the landowner's experience and understanding of agriculture is going to be very key to getting a reasonable lease rate for agricultural land. So with setting the price, it's really important that you can negotiate on what you can afford. So what's real, and that you are able to have a conversation with a landowner about what your business plan is, what that return on investment is, and be able to really show them why you're able to pay what you can pay and how that's reasonable for agricultural use of land. But you can also provide the landowner with some things that maybe are not going to cost you more or much financially. So you can provide services. You might say that you would trade for a CSA share. So that's whether you are trading, a traditional CSA, which is a weekly deliver of produce or flowers, whatever it is you're growing, crops on that land. It might also be that you agree to raise a beef cattle, an animal or a hog for that family, and that you're raising that. And that's part of what you're doing in exchange for leasing that land. You might be able to do some land management services like improving pasture. I talked a little bit about a case of that in one of our last classes, or caring for their livestock or their horses. What are those services that would be really helpful? And all of those things have value because they have value of your time and your skills and expertise, which a landowner may not have. And so valuing that time and that investment can help with that lease agreement. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about your financial statements and how that homework went for you in terms of doing your financial self-assessment. So I'm going to stop this share so we can come back together as a group. So does anybody want to share about developing a personal balance sheet and how that went?
I'll share a little bit. So
Okay.
for us, we're on year 6 of running our farm. And it's kind of funny when we look at, we do balance sheets and stuff all the time where we've already been farming. But to really just look at like the personal side of it and take the business out, we've reinvested so much into the business that the personal side looks really sad right now because it's all rolling back into the business. But, that's kind of the reality of agriculture when you're starting out. So anyway, it's kind of funny because usually I look at it all together. But with this specifically, I kind of pulled it out and was like, ooh, that looks pretty funny on its own. But altogether, we're in a spot, I think, where we'd be able to get something done before next growing season if we can find the right place.
That's great. That's great. Did anybody else want to share anything about? Was it easy to identify what you needed to put on your personal balance sheet? What you had in terms of assets and liabilities? Okay. What about the income statement?
So that one was fairly easy for me. I mean, what we're looking at is a smaller operation, and like I fully anticipated, year one is a huge loser. But that's what I would expect, because that's when I'm purchasing all the equipment. Year two, I built it with two options. One is a so I broke up my the longer term goal into three parts and figured I would scale into a year 1, 2, 3. So do a 30, 60, 90, all the way up to 100% on the third year. But I also inserted a second year, which was interesting, which is the same amount of land as year one with no expansion. But at that point, all the equipment is paid for, because I am starting so small. I mean, it's probably $40,000 total for equipment in the small operation that I'm looking to do. And so some of that I want to purchase even before I actually start, farming. So it's a great exercise. And it threw me, once I got to the point where I know that I can't do this by myself. And then you start adding in help. It's what it spoke to for me is the same thing that I do in business every day, and it's work, the efficiency, workflow, cutting out steps, and it just spoke to me how critical the process is in farming. It's no different than the business I do today, and yet it's totally different. But it's a constant looking at evaluating your process, taking steps out, finding better, faster, cheaper ways to do it without compromising the end product. It's like, that's what I do every day. But it was so interesting to me to think about how can I apply that same mindset to farming, because once I start adding another person, 2 people, 3 people, I can't do this by myself, but there goes all my profit, right? So,
Exactly.
Well, it was a great exercise.
Oh, good. Okay. Did anyone draft a cash flow statement?
Yeah, we did.
And did you find that were there any things that was revealed from doing that, or did you already have a cash flow statement that you just relooked at?
So I was putting one together for acquiring the new scale and building the feed yard and stuff. And if we could get it in place, it would cash flow really well based on, existing relationships that we've used on a smaller scale. We've talked to them, and if the opportunity's there, then they'll scale it up. And so for us, the cash flow's there with that operation, especially because it would be, monthly throughout the season that we're feeding for them. And then the off season of the backgrounding calves is in the summer. But at that point, we could background dairy heifers for dairies and stuff in the area too. But even just with the contracts over the winter, we'd be able to cash flow the purchase and everything. So for us with that, it really there weren't a lot of problems, I guess, that we kind of uncovered putting the actual cash flow statement together, because we've done like an income statement that haven't broken it out on the cash basis really before. So that was a good thing to do. I liked breaking it out that way.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So I know when Jesika comes on, she's going to be talking more about how these specific financial statements are going to be important. And I know most of you are looking at purchasing land, and so she'll be talking about it in that context. But another question that I have for you, and this is around leases, is would anybody say that a handshake is enough for a lease agreement?
No.
I agree. It's not enough. But why do you think it is then that people really avoid written agreements? Because I think there are so many farm stories when I'm talking to farmers about they didn't do a written agreement, oral agreements. Some successful and many not successful. But why do you think it is that people don't do written agreements?
So, sorry, my child is being they're boisterous tonight. But you are not hungry. In our case with our handshake deal, I have some ideas of why that is, that our landowner wanted to keep it as a handshake deal. And part of it is, he's a family friend. And I think it was to protect us more than it was to protect him from being obligated to fulfill and meet certain requirements. He wanted to give us the flexibility to fail a little bit. So I don't know if that speaks to the typical situation, but that was our situation, I think.
I think a lot of times it makes people uncomfortable to have to sit down and walk through all of the what ifs. And Tyler said that it can bring some emotions to the surface too sometimes, especially if the landowner has farmed that ground for a long time, to have to actually spell out, if this happens, this, or I want you to do it this way, or and just having to actually nail down the details can feel a little overwhelming too, as opposed to just kind of figuring it out as we go. But that being said, having it written out really in the long run is helpful to everyone. It just takes the time up front to get it done.
This is Marcy, and today the reason I was late is I was meeting with some prospective tenants to determine the rent value and some of the terms of the lease. And we have found at the Farmland Trust that it's cumbersome to do a lease, but what it does is it helps both people to understand what everybody's expectations are. It clarifies it, and so there's kind of no question. So there's none of that, well, you never told me that, or you didn't say that, or and so we ask the tough questions. It's like, okay, how much can you afford? Do you want to make your payments every month? Do you want to make them, twice during the growing season when you've got good cash flow? So you have to ask those questions. It's just kind of like being bold and knocking on people's doors and saying, hey, can I lease your land to farm? You gotta ask these tough things, and some people are really good and respectful at doing that, and some people are a little more straight to the point. So whatever your style is, because everyone's got a different style, you got to do it. And a lawyer can be expensive, and there's a lot of templates out there, but boy, if you can do this in a non-threatening way, and Leah's point is so good about if it's an emotional thing for an older person who can no longer farm their land, it can be a toughie, but it's just better to have that relationship. And so today when I spent with one other person about an hour with these two potential renters, we put a lot of stuff out on the table and talked about expectations, and so we reduced the rent for them to start with, and then in so many years we have the ability to increase the rent because the land has just been used as pasture, and they want to do some row crops on 3 acres of it, which it's suitable for. But it's going to take them a while to get that land in shape and all that good stuff. But what they're really excited about is they've got more land to add to their organic operation, so they can fallow land at different times. So they'll have to put less inputs in, less parasites and things like that. So it can be adversarial, but if you can kind of set the tone when you have that discussion, and you can email back and forth without a lot of emotion of saying, these are the things that we'd like to talk about. So be thinking about them. So when people do get together, they have their thoughts together.
Marcy, in your experience, do you feel that after the conversations have happened, people are actually feeling better because they had the more in-depth conversation about the leases?
I think they do because it unmasks a lot of things that wouldn't otherwise be talked about. Like, can we raise the rent? And this couple, we're looking at doing a rolling lease for it. And so I'd like to get your opinion too on, and just your thoughts on rolling leases. You kind of skipped over that, but I think everyone felt good. And so now I've got all these terms. And so now I go to our lawyer and I say, okay, let's put these into our lease. Because then there's no surprises. The last thing you want to do is surprise people when you hand them a lease and there's all these bombs in there. So it just helps. And so on another piece of property that I'm negotiating on, we had a meeting last night, Farm Preservation Committee meeting on this parcel we're looking to purchase. And so I let the homeowner, the dairy owner know that, you know, we're meeting tonight. These are the things we're going to discuss. And then this morning I got back to her and I said, okay, these are the things that we discussed. And now it's going to go to the full board. And so I'll have some answers for you here next week. And, you know, she got back to me in her email and she says, I appreciate you telling me these things. So I just think that's part of the hand-holding that has to go in this process.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think one of the things that I've heard from farmers that have done leases, and generally speaking, a lot of these farmers are new farmers. So they're just getting started. They're accessing land for the first time. They might be accessing multiple parcels, trying to pull things together to get enough land to farm on. And I think one of the things is they don't know what they don't know. And so they don't understand why a written lease would be important. I mean, they're not anticipating, especially if they know the landowner, not anticipating problems. We're friends, or this person understands agriculture, they really want to help me. And so not knowing, you know, or not thinking through a lot of the different provisions that we've talked about that are in leases can then end up to having conflicts that aren't resolvable in the moment. And so that can end up in a pretty expensive deterioration of that relationship. And I also think that one of the things that is really nerve-wracking about leases is that it commits both parties for a certain amount of time. And, you know, 1 year can seem like it's doable, but longer than that, sometimes that feels really nervous. And, you know, making those types of commitments are pretty big things to do. And I think sometimes there's an avoidance of being really clear about what those commitments are. And so I think those are some of the reasons that people don't do it. And we as a culture have a hard time talking about money is another thing. And everybody has a different relationship with money and different things that we even unconsciously bring in to our feelings and our reaction to money that comes from, it can be from a cultural framework, it can be from how our family managed money and transparency of money. Our culture is often very private about money. So sharing those things can be really uncomfortable initially. And, you know, I think our culture's more comfortable in doing that with a banker than with somebody in a land lease situation. But I do think that we're also experiencing, as I mentioned before, so many changes in that, because now it's not uncommon if you rent an apartment that you have to provide financial information and you have to have like a credit check and you have to have references. So we're seeing in our culture overall that there's a change in the way people are approaching rent and lease agreements. And I think that that's going to be beneficial in some ways for agriculture. So Marcy, you wanted to talk more about rolling leases.
Yes, we're looking at doing a 2-year rolling lease with this couple. And so my understanding is they we sign a lease for 2 years, and at the end of the first year they tell us, yes, I want to renew it for an additional 2 years. So it keeps adding on a year, so we get a good notice if they are going to pull out if it's not working for them. What are the pros and cons of those kind of leases?
I will say I'm not an expert in rolling leases, so I'll tell you what I know. And
Okay.
then I just want to be transparent about that. So I think one of the pros of that is that there's potential for it to be a bit more secure on both the landowner and the tenant side. So with a rolling lease, there's, you know, a declared statement of wanting to have a longer term relationship, most likely. And then you're not in a situation, if you have terms that really you can negotiate out and be comfortable with at the onset that are, let's say, for 3 years or for 4 years, depending on what your provisions are for that rolling. You're negotiating them one time, and then for the tenant, they know what those provisions are into the future. So they might feel more secure because they know what the rate of increase is going to be, if there's going to be any in the lease fees ahead of time. They might be planning for if it's going to roll over in year 2, and I know that this infrastructure investment is going to happen, that it's kind of laid out in advance how those things are going to unfold. And depending upon when a lease renews, that might be really important just in terms of time management. And so it may also be that you're looking at having a rolling lease because you want to be in a situation where that farmer is going to be really busy at the time that that lease would mature and need to be renegotiated, and that is not the best situation for them. So it can automatically roll over and you can reset that timeline. So I think those are some of the advantages. I think some of the disadvantages, particularly for maybe more for the landowner than for the tenant, is that you might have some changes that you would like to really change that lease agreement in some way, particularly the rate. And, you know, in some ways that might feel less comfortable when you have a rolling lease where you've made agreements in advance.
So yeah, so we have built into the lease that at certain points in time, we can raise the lease rate or we can lower it. And then we have parameters like a certain percentage, like, 5%, it can go up 5% in so many, so, and we've done both depending on what the market is. So are you saying that, because the way I envisioned it was that the lease just keeps going, the terms in the original lease just keep going.
Right.
And so, okay, so that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if somebody wants to end the lease, it's written in the provisions of the lease that they have to give notice. It might be 30 days in advance, whatever the time period in advance. Otherwise, it automatically renews and people do not have to come back together and sign that agreement again. The agreement becomes binding for the next, year, whatever the stipulation, or 2 years, whatever that stipulation of the length of the lease is.
Okay, yeah. So what we're asking is that they give us at least a 1 year notice, so that gives us enough time to find someone else and to farm the land.
Right, and yeah, exactly. So I want to welcome Jesika. Hi, Jesika. We're just having a discussion about leases. I just went through a whole bunch of provisions talking about lease agreements, and so we were just wrapping that up. Perfect timing to have you come in. So everyone, I want to introduce Jesika Harper. She's with Northwest Farm Credit Services, and she's the VP for their Ag Visions program. And I think it'd be helpful to Jesika if everybody could go around and introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about what you're thinking in terms of buying or leasing land and where you're at in that process. And I'll just call upon people as I see them on my screen. How about that?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, great. David, let's start with you.
I'm currently a production manager at a farm, and I'm looking to take it over in the next 5 years, and would like to find a place where some of the highly intensive time things can be at my house, and then probably lease some land around for the larger fields.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Janelle. She might have had to step away for a sec, so I'll come back to Janelle. She's actually on the East Coast right now, Jesika. Greg. We can't hear you, Greg, if you're trying to talk. Okay, we'll keep going. Leah.
Hello. So we are over in eastern Idaho, and we are looking to purchase a piece of ground to build a backgrounding feed yard for calves. And we are kind of in the place now where we're just looking for the right piece of ground and making a move on it in the next 6 months to a year. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Mia and Tyler. Hi, Greg.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Step away for a minute. So I'm based in the Seattle area, and I'm looking for just small property, probably anywhere from 3 to 10 acres in northern Idaho, and looking to set up a market gardening operation, organic farming, organic, fruit, vegetable production, and looking to scale into this and pay cash as I go in preparation, so that we can dive in, take a big pay cut, and work really hard.
Thanks, Greg. Melinda typed in the chat that she's looking to grow a flower farm to move into large scale flower farming in Coeur d'Alene area. She wants to start with a lease and then to eventually buy if all goes well. Holly.
I'm Holly James, and I live over further east than Hayes in eastern Idaho. And right now this is mainly a fact finding, but eventually we'd like to get a larger plot of land and do more sustainable homestead farming, basically.
Thanks, Holly. Zach.
Hi, my name is Zach. I live in the Moscow. I ran the restaurant, and I looking to do the farm to table, and then I was thinking to purchase the land in about the 2 to 3 yard, but it's just a very small land. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. See, Marcy.
So Jessica, I'm a little different. I am on the board of a farmland trust. So we purchase farms and then lease them back to farmers. So I wanted to learn more about what we should be asking prospective tenants on our farms. And so I thought this would be a good class to view from the leasing side of things. But I also want to say that Farm Credit has given us some grants in the past, and I appreciate those. So thank you.
Which farmland trust are you with?
South of the Sound Community Farmland Trust here in Olympia, Washington is our office.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Janelle, are you back?
I had nuclear meltdown. I have 4-year-old twins, Jesika. So, and it's right about bedtime on the East Coast over here. So we just had total nuclear meltdown.
Oh.
Anyway, I was born and raised in Spokane and have been living in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a cut flower and medicinal herb farmer over here and looking to transition back to the inland Northwest. And that's the quick and dirty version right now, as you still hear them continuing to melt down in the background. I'm going to disappear again. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, and then Mackenzie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mackenzie Lawrence. I work with Colette DePhelps at University of Idaho Extension, here to support all of these participants in their land dreams.
Great, that's a fun job.
It is a really fun job.
Okay, thanks, Mackenzie. So Jesika, I want to hand the slides, the screen over to you. And
Okay, super, thanks. Well, it's good to meet all of you and hear about the different things that you have planned for your future. I think that's really helpful context as we talk about, what we're going to talk about here for a little bit. So just housekeeping wise, Colette, what time do you want me to wrap up?
I only need about maybe 5:55 or so. I have a couple of wrap up
Okay,
for
perfect.
next week. So.
Thanks. So we're working from home, all of us in Spokane that work at our headquarters location. We've got about 250 employees that work in that building that just for, all the reasons that we're aware of, we've been sent home. So I actually live in Idaho. I live in Rathdrum and have my own small farm. We've got a number of mules and horses, and I spend a lot of time with them, as well as, we raise 150 or so chickens a year and kind of have that whole lifestyle that that we're going to be talking about. So certainly not a large scale farm, but more of a lifestyle farmer. And I started working for Farm Credit about 8 or 9 years ago. Previous to that, I worked for a customer of ours and heard about this opportunity. I was a loan officer previous to the position that I'm in now. And my responsibilities now are really, it's wonderful. I get to work for our Ag Vision program, and it's a body of work that Farm Credit sets aside that is really rooted in our mission, which is to build the next generation of farmers. So we've got this program called Ag Vision that is just to help do that. And so we spend, all of our day really just doing a lot of education and outreach, writing loans, working with the Farm Service Agency, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. And we've got about 15 or so employees that are designated loan officers just for this program, but anybody in our company can write a quote Ag Vision loan. We've got about 2,500 customers in this particular loan portfolio. And it's almost $1 billion segment of our overall portfolio. So a lot of effort and time goes into these really important producers. So if I could, Colette, get a hold of those slides, then we'll get started.
Sure. Do you want me to set it that you can share them from your computer, or you want me to share them from mine?
If maybe just pull them up, that might work. Cause I don't know how to share my screen here.
Okay, I can walk you through it if you want to share.
Okay, let's do that real quick.
Okay, so on the bottom of your screen, there's a control bar and there's a green up arrow that says share screen.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
And if you click on that, then you get to choose what to show, which is, your presentation.
Yeah, it's just not popped up yet to select it.
So when you click on that, it doesn't pop up.
Mm-mm.
Is the presentation already open on your computer?
Yeah. Unless, can you see it here?
No. The way it works for us is when you click on it, you see what's open on your computer, and then you just click on that little screen.
Yeah, I'm not getting that option, so that's okay. Just for time's sake, maybe let's just
kind
of go through this.
Yes, let me get rid of the sidebar if I can.
That is so funny, Leah. I saw your name and I thought, I think I know her.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see this.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, I'm apologize. It has that little PDF thing on the side.
That's
If
okay.
you click on that little arrow that's right to the left of the word protect, it will go away.
Protect.
Right, yeah, there's a little tiny arrow on that gray part. I don't know if I'm explaining this right. It's really small right there. Yep.
I'm always learning some technology. Okay, here we go.
Wonderful. Okay, so one of the things that we were talking about is, I know last week you talked a lot about financials, and that's great because those are going to be important whether you do business with us or you have a lot of your own money and you are just going to run a business. So that is terrific, just to get off on that right foot. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit here is just the different resources that you can apply to once you've got your ducks in a row with all of your financial statements. And then just some things that we talk to our customers about, considerations for leasing versus buying. There's no perfect answer, as I'm sure Colette's already shared, because there's an infinite amount of things that a person wants to do. So to say that if you're a beginning farmer, the right way is to lease, that wouldn't be fair. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are briefly, and then I'm going to really dive into some of the programs that you can look at and tools that you can use to decide what makes sense for you. I mentioned that I live in North Idaho, but we service this territory that's shown here in green, including Alaska. And we've got 44 branch locations and about 750 employees or so by now. Next slide. We do a lot of, I know you're all located throughout the state, and we're going to talk about different offices, but you can visit our website if you ever wanted to talk to us, or depending upon where you're at in your farm journey, the farm service agency offices are going to be also near you. So in terms of what we offer at Northwest, we do traditional real estate financing. I was thinking about, I think it was Greg that talked about what he has pictured, and to us, that type of beginning farmer is every bit as much a fit for this Ag Vision program as somebody that's going to dive in and lease 5,000 acres on a row crop operation in southern Idaho. So we've got different programs to work for each. We offer operating lines of credit. And I think that's probably one thing that a lot of people, as they're first getting into this, that's probably the greatest mystery, things that they didn't even know existed. And so we're going to talk about some really cool things that you can do with even small operating lines to help you get started. And those work well for farming because a lot of us, you only get paid once a year. And so we're able to put together cash flow budgets that allow us to understand when your highest expenses are. And then at the end of the year, know about when your payday is, and that's going to be when your annual loan payment is due. So we're going to talk about those because operating lines of credit are going to be important whether you're leasing or whether you're buying. And with the operating lines too, you can set aside your cash rent payments in those along with your inputs and other expenses. We do offer equipment financing, just like John Deere or Kubota or any of those. But we'll also finance kind of some of the more obscure equipment at times. There's a lot of really neat, different sophisticated things out there that you can't always find just at a equipment dealership, and we can help with that. We offer crop insurance. It's a federal program, and we've got agents in almost every state. And then lastly, our country home loans program is really for a rural resident that's looking for that, 10 to 100 acres. A lot of traditional banks don't like to make loans to buyers that have more than a 5 or 10 acre lot because they can't sell them on the open market as easy if that loan should default. And so that's why sometimes we'll get customers that come in and they find a house that's got a silo and, might have a little orchard, or it's on a, 47 acres, and they'll come to us and they've already, they're weary because they've been through a number of different loan applications at different banks and learned through them that they wouldn't finance those properties. Well, with us, that's what we do all day long. Next slide.
Did I go too slide?
No, you're good. So with our Ag Vision program, I talk about, we're helping the next generation of farming. So what does that mean? That means that our customers, they only need to meet one of these 3 criteria. And this is real similar to what you'll see for the farm service agencies eligibility criteria. Not exactly the same, but very, very similar. So a young farmer we consider is someone who's 35 years of age or younger. A beginning farmer is someone with 10 years of farm management experience or less. And I put emphasis on management. That isn't necessarily just, you know, working at a farm, but really getting into making some of those key day-to-day decisions. And then small is when your gross farm earnings are $350,000 or less. Again, you only have to meet one of those criteria. And it's pretty neat too. We're seeing a lot of not only beginning farmers that are young, but a lot of beginning farmers that have had careers, you know, in the city, and they're just kind of done with that life, and they're looking for a change. So we see a lot of beginning farmers that are, you know, in their 50s plus, and that's pretty cool to see. Next slide. So some things that we offer for this that are really only offered to people that are in this program is, one of the most important things is that we have reduced underwriting criteria. We understand that people that are getting started in farming are not going to have balance sheets that are as strong as people that have been farming for a very long time. So we'll look at a lot of the traditional financial ratios that we would look at for analyzing credit, and we'll make some concessions there. And again, every operation is different, and we look for a business plan that makes sense. But we do want to look at that business plan, look at the payment history that's on the credit report, and then say, okay, is this person really done their homework? You know, maybe their debt to income ratio isn't perfect. There's a little student loan debt in there, or, you know, they've maybe financed a few things to try to get this operation off the ground. On debt to assets too, you know, if you just made that purchase, you haven't had time to build that equity and get your principal paid down. So things like that make sense. We offer fee waivers of up to $3,000 for appraisal fees and loan origination. You know, if you're not in this program, you have to pay those. And so that's a way to help keep your monthly payments down. We have a competitive interest rate because we use, like a lot of banks, you know, a risk-based score to place our customers in different interest rate tiers, but we'll actually give you preferred pricing, even though maybe as I mentioned, your underwriting criteria isn't quite as good as a more experienced producer. We'll still put you in that lower interest rate bracket. And we also, just like a credit union or others, we're a cooperative. We're owned by our borrowers. And with that, we pay an annual patronage payment at 1.25% of your average daily balance. And that's paid out annually in March. Lastly, we also offer $1,000 expense reimbursement for education and technology benefits. We want to know that our customers have what they need. We want them to feel like if there's a conference that they want to go to, or if they want to get, you know, an accountant to look at their financials, or if they want to buy a drone or an iPad, we want them to be able to do that. And so we'll offer those reimbursements to help pay for some of those things. Next slide. And then this is the last slide on us, but we have a program called RateWise, and I would encourage you to even get signed up for that now. If whether you think you need a loan right now or not, we're not going to email you and bug you at all, but it's a way to start earning credits so that when you do, and if you do get a loan, you can get interest rate reductions, and you can visit our website and learn more about that. But we've got customers that are getting 0.75 percentage point off of their interest rates on already very, very low rates. And, you know, as a beginning borrower, beginning farmer, that's very helpful, obviously. So I'd encourage you to take a peek at that. Okay, so next slide. These are some things that are pretty, I just wanted to put this up real quick so you can take a peek at it. We do have a minimum 650 credit score. We want to see that the business plan that you've presented and the projections and the financials that go with it make sense. I would love to be able to write a blank check to everybody's hopes and dreams, but at the same time, as a cooperative, we have to write loans that we know can be paid back. So we know that we're not putting you in a worse situation. And so with that, we just, like Colette showed in last week's class, we go through all of those financials. We actually sit down and go through those together. And that's part of our outreach, is teaching you how that's done. So we never expect a perfect balance sheet or a perfect cash flow budget to show up, you know, in our inbox. Never. That's not how the real world works. We're all, you know, here to help show you what goes where. And so I would encourage you not to be intimidated at all. If you have any questions, that's our job. So that's probably enough on that. Next slide. Okay, so this is where I think it really gets fun, because there's a lot of misunderstandings with, you know, who's farm credit and who's the farm service agency, and are there grants? Because right now there's a whole lot of people in this world that are trying to help young, beginning and small producers. And it's almost overwhelming because there's so much information out there. People just don't know where to go. And so I thought, okay, what could I share that is going to be kind of the table stakes, the main things that a person needs to know? And really key to the success that we see with our beginning farmers is the partnerships that we have with the Farm Service Agency. So I'm going to share some slides here momentarily from some things that we a lot of times do joint presentations with. And I think this will be helpful, and we'll leave some time for questions. So as it says here, we work and partner with the Farm Service Agency. They've got branches located throughout the area. And Alan, I'm on a Zoom, hon. You're on video. My husband just walked in. And so with that, we have Farm Service Agency guarantees that we offer in partnership with them. And what that means is if we write a loan for, you know, $400,000, the FSA guarantee is kind of like a insurance policy on that loan. And there's a fee to do that. But if you're an AgVision customer, we actually pay for that. It can get expensive depending upon the size of your loan. It can be, you know, $1,000 to $10,000. It varies. It's based on the loan and the percentage. But what we love about these is that we know if, you know, hopefully nothing happens, but if something did happen, I mean, there's never anything, you know, like a perfect loan. We know that the Farm Service Agency is going to pay up to 95% of that. And so that gives us a lot more flexibility and understanding to say, okay, we're going to go out on a limb with this a little bit more because we have this. And also the thing that's really great is they have this easy guarantee option. So if your loan is only like $100,000, then you only have to go through this simple one-page easy guarantee option. And I know there's a lot of rumors out there about Farm Service Agency. There's so much paperwork. It's really challenging. We work with them all day long. They're wonderful people. And at the end of the day, you'll learn a lot in the process. And once you get through it, it's really not that bad. Then the second thing that we use a lot is this beginning farmer down payment program. So if you're going to buy land, let's just say, and finance that with us at Northwest Farm Credit, you know, not have anybody else involved, our down payments are generally going to be right about 20%. And 20% is a lot of money, especially if you're beginning. However, we've got a program called Jumpstart that in certain situations can offer up to $100,000 for a separate loan to help with that down payment. Obviously, after the loan closes, we have to show that everything can be paid and there's going to be working capital left over, because at the end of the day, obviously, you've got to run your farm. But at the same time, if you qualify for Farm Service Agency borrowing, which I'm going to go through that here in a moment, you can actually find yourself in an opportunity where you only have to put 5% down. And what's so great about that, in addition, is that we call it the 545-50 because 45% of your loan is going to be financed through the Farm Service Agency. And their interest rates right now, it's like 2.5% and less. They're very, very low interest loans. And then the 50% that you have financed with us, we still have very, very good interest rates. And the note or the term loan that you would have with us is financed out over 30 years. So that helps keep your payment low as well. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit more details on just the Farm Service Agency. Next slide. So for those of you that don't know, the Farm Service Agency is an arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they offer, the USDA has so many great programs for farmers, and not just from our perspective through the FSA, but they've also got the Risk Management Association, they've got the NRCS. So there's a lot of other things that you can utilize the Department of Ag for. So I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with those programs once you get ready to dive into this. But they have a host of things that they can help with. Next slide. We're only going to be focusing on the Farm Service Agency here. So when we talk about who's eligible, they've got targeted funding for beginning farmers. They also, though, will help more experienced farmers. And they work, as I mentioned, a lot with young, beginning, older, smaller borrowers. They do it all. Next slide. Okay, there's a lot on here, but I just want you to take a quick peek at some of the main things for eligibility. The one that we get tripped up on the most is the second one. And I heard the introduction from all of you here, and we didn't really talk a lot about who's been managing a farm. I know we've got somebody that's working on a succession plan, and the Farm Service Agency is really good about helping with those types of things. There's letters of attestation that you can complete in conjunction with the farmer that you're working with to say, I've been making management decisions on this operation for at least 3 years. If you have a college degree or you've been in the service, they'll take a year off of this 3-year requirement. Now, they would love to see a Schedule F, which is a form on your tax return that shows your farm income, as basically, a verification that, yes, this is what you did. At the same time, if you don't have that, but you've kept good records in another format, just work with your local office. And they've been really great to work with to help to prove that you would be eligible for these programs. What they're not is they're a beginning farmer lender, but they're not a no experience lender, because they want to know that if they're going to offer these programs, this isn't kind of a fly by night idea. That you've dipped your toe in the water, you've started to figure this out, and then that just gives them a little bit more confidence that you're serious about pursuing this as a career. And this is also really for family farms. This isn't for big corporations. You can't be an absentee landowner. This is for people that are working the land. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the types of direct loans that they offer, I mentioned that they offer, they call this farm operating loans, operating lines. That's all the same type. That's where you sit down and you figure what your expenses are going to be for a season or an operating cycle, and they'll finance you for that short-term time. Then we've obviously got the farm ownership loans that are much bigger, micro loans, and those are where a lot of our Ag Vision customers start out. So, we take a lot of calls from people that are just real interested in getting started, but they don't know where to go. And I'll encourage them to go visit with the Farm Service Agency, because their microloan program, you only need 1 year of experience. So that takes, that's a lot quicker point of entry. And the application process is a little bit less. So it's just a really good confidence booster to get started with them and build that relationship. And then they also offer emergency loans for, forest fires has been a really big one lately, but a number of other things. Next slide. Okay, so people want to know, what goes into a farm operating line? So we would sit down and we would, or the Farm Service Agency, it's a very similar process, and go through and add up all of the different things that you think that you're going to spend on this operation to make a go of it in, from springtime to when you sell your crop. And these are the different things that we typically see in there. The Farm Service Agency does have certain loan limits, but typically for a beginning farmer, we don't worry too much about them, needing to exceed that amount that they have offered. And the youth loans that are noted there, that's for kids that are in 4-H. I don't know anybody that's been around club calves or any of these 4-H programs lately, but some of those projects are very expensive to get into. And it's pretty neat that they're helping to support kids that are in programs like 4-H and FFA with these youth loans. Next slide.
Oh, I have a question, Jessica.
Sure.
So in these farm operating loans, if you're looking at what your cash flow budget is, would they like to see the personal separate from the farm?
Yes, generally that's how we do that, because for operating loan, it is only to come up with your loan amount to run your operation. Sometimes we'll see some family living in there, just as a, as a flat line item for real basic needs if there's no other farm or off farm income. So if this is it, then obviously we might see, $30,000 in there just as a lump sum. And obviously that's just a standard number if that, is maybe a single person, no kids to cover that. But we like to keep it clean and have the farm operation budget, because what it's going to tell us is how much money do we need to infuse to make this farm work, not to, pay your Verizon bill for your kids or what, we try to streamline it that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so, quote, regular farm ownership loan, the Farm Service Agency, and they'll provide 100% of the financing. They'll refinance it, or they will finance it for up to 40 years. For real young people just getting started that can get into a Farm Service Agency program like this, it can be very, very helpful, because you've got a long repayment term, keeps your payment low, the interest rate is low, and it just kind of gets you going. We see a lot of people that are working on this. It mentions here you can't refinance any debt in this, but this is a pretty common way that people pursue purchasing. Okay, next slide. Okay, the participation, this is the one that we talked about earlier, where we talked about that excuse me, that's the next slide. This one is a 50-50. So this is where Farm Service Agency does 50% and we do 50%. The difference with this one is the part that we have that's 50% is still going to require a little bit higher down payment amount. And so it doesn't quite get you in at that lower down payment like the beginning farmer down payment loan does. So the point in showing you these, next slide, is that there's just a lot of different things that you can do depending upon what you need. And the Farm Service Agency is really good about being in second lien position. And that might not mean a lot to you now, but that's actually a big deal, because other banks that won't do that, if they say that they have to be in first lien position and we say that we have to be in first lien position, then it's a no-go. But if they're saying, no, we'll take the back seat, so if something happens with this, you'll get paid first and then we'll get paid second, it just makes these processes go a lot smoother. Next slide. Okay, this down payment farm ownership loan is the one that we talked about. And this is probably the one that if we're talking about purchases of a farm versus leasing a farm, this is the biggest one that we use for beginning farmers on the purchase side. And then the operating line with the Farm Service Agency is a real big one that we see for people that are just leasing ground. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example. 80 acres for $400,000. I mean, shoot, even right now, that's, things are getting expensive. Obviously, you all see and know that, but even with a 5% down, it's $20,000. So that's where we see a lot of success with this program, because even though it seems like a lot of money down, it's still significantly less than if we were to try to get 20% down on $400,000. So the Farm Service Agency loan would end up being $180,000. So you would pay them separately from us. And in this instance, and we're not the only bank for Farm Service Agency. They've got other banks that they do business with too. And there's a couple others that do ag lending as well. But you want to find a good ag lender for something like this. Because we do a lot of business with them, and we've kind of know how we work together, and that makes it a lot easier experience for our customers. So the other loan would be $200,000, say with a Northwest Farm Credit, and then The farm service agency payment then is going to be $10,500. Our payment's going to be $13,000 for a total of that $23,500. So that payment would be structured. Let's just say it's a, I don't know, it's a hay. Then we could schedule that to be paid at the end of the year, and then you would just begin your next crop cycle the following year, maybe have an operating line to run your farm, and then know that you don't have to make this payment again until the end of the year. One of the things that they'll do though is we take, we put in a thing called a direct notice. So we want to know who you're selling your crops to, and we make sure that our, our names are on the check. And a lot of people don't know that, but we want to make sure that, your farm loan payment gets paid with farm proceeds. And so that's all written up in the documentation. And with these particular loans too, we do see a lot of pairing of the farm service agency guarantees on the portion that that 50% loan balance that we would have. Next slide. Okay, so the microloans, for those of you that are not ready to buy the big farm, the microloans are wonderful because they're for $50,000 or less, and $50,000 is still a big loan amount for a lot of people, especially if you're doing the market garden or maybe more of a CSA veggie type of operation. But what's nice about it is a very much easier application process. And as it says here, there's reduced experience requirements. So you still need to have a business plan and prove that you can repay the loan and all of those things. But instead of saying that you've done that for 3 years, you only have to have done it for 1 year. And this is being used a lot with more of the farmers market farmers, smaller farmers that are close to town, and people that have got some real specialty or value added types of operations. Next slide. Okay, so on the microloan side, you can get an operating loan or an ownership loan. So if you're starting with a small lease, and we've got some really good examples of using this in the Spokane area, working with a couple of beginning farmers that were getting into nurseries. And they started out saying, oh gosh, Spokane is so expensive, but I think I need about 20 acres and I've got to put a greenhouse on it. And they were going to go in to pretty big time debt just for a place to put their greenhouse. And we said, you don't need that much space. Is there a way that you could find like a little plot of land and, kind of get started? And this particular farmer had been working for a really good sized nursery just outside of Spokane for quite a while. And the owner of that operation wrote a letter to say that he'd been making lots of decisions regarding, seed purchases and the sales and fertilizer and all of these things. And so the FSA said, okay, he obviously has a plan and he's got some experience. And so instead he found a friend that had 3 acres, got a loan for the greenhouse to put on it, and then got an operating line to help him with his expenses the following year. And I got an email from him not that long ago, and he's doing great. He said, I'm so glad I didn't go in way over my head and in debt, because the operation wouldn't have made the payment anyway. So that's just a real good example. And he's learned a lot. Now he feels like he didn't have that financial pressure, and he's happy to kind of start small and snowball it from there. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of where you go, because if you just go, Google FSA, it can get kind of confusing. So this website here has got a really nice, GIS map that'll take you right where you need to go depending upon where you're at in Idaho. So it's kind of small there, but if you Googled, USDA FSA or newfarmer.gov, you'll find this site. But I think Colette, you'll probably have these slides available. So next slide. You'll just go and select your state, and then within the state, there's counties there. So these are all interactive. So you click on your click on where you live. So go to the next slide. And then here I just picked up Latah County. to find Moscow. The one thing worth noting here is that there's two. And so thank you for putting that in, Mackenzie. Just make sure you click on this farm service agency area that I highlighted, because when you call, they do have a rural development office, and you'll kind of get in this loop that can be kind of frustrating. So that's the key, is click on the farm service agency link. Next slide. Okay, so I mentioned, and I know, you've seen the balance sheets and the cash flow budgets and all of that. And as much of a, challenge as it is to gather it all up and, run your farm and take care of life that has nothing to do with the farm, it's a lot. At the same time, when a customer comes in and they can provide us with these things, it gives us a lot of confidence that if we're going to make this loan, we're making a really good decision, because you've done a lot of the work. And again, if you go in and say, I don't know this, and you're real humble with your questions, that's great. We fully expect that. But the jokes about the shoe boxes with the receipts and all of that, we actually don't see a whole lot of that, because our customers know that these things are important, and they're important not just to us, but they're important to the farm service agency too. They'll have a few different requirements, governmental forms that they need. This purchase and sale agreement is one that is going to be the basis for a loan purchase on a real estate deal. So we don't do, for instance, like a pre-approval letter. Ag lenders are a little bit different, unless you're going through a country home loan product that we have that is designed for people that are buying a rural property, maybe not the full-on farm yet. And they will do some of those pre-approval letters, but within the ag lending area of what we do, the purchase and sale agreement is really the document that says, this is the legal description, these are the terms, this is the seller, this is the buyer, this is the closing date. And that catches people off guard. Sometimes when they're making a land purchase, they don't know that that's something that they need. The last bullet point there, the entity documents, that's just really if you're an LLC, or you might have business partners or things like that. And if you are, you'll know what those things are. Next slide. Okay, this is going to be really the last thing I want you to take away from this, is that the National Young Farmers Coalition has got a website put together that is wonderful. Colette, have you mentioned it yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Farm Credit helped to back this getting done, and it doesn't really get the publicity that it really deserves. And so there to the right, that's just a little screenshot of the calculator. But what's fun about it is you're thinking about leasing versus buying and all of these different what if scenarios. You can go in here and plug in different numbers. And not only is it going to give you it's way beyond a simple loan calculator, because it's going to give you a lot of your key financial ratios. It's going to show you if they're good or if maybe the ratios are not so good. There's some information on the right on leases. There's checklists. As I mentioned here, there's farm rental assessment checklists. I love the compare scenarios option, because you can say, okay, kind of like the nursery producer that I was talking about earlier. Had he been able to use this, it wasn't ready to go then, but he could say, okay, I want to buy this, expensive property in Spokane and have this big land payment, or I'm going to go, lease and dip my toe in the water and see how it goes and be able to see how much money he's going to save. Now we know that there's land appreciation and all of that, and that is scary. People think about that as like, well, what if I don't buy, and what if it's going to keep getting more expensive? And that's a risk that we don't have a crystal ball, and certainly we can't avoid, and that's a decision that you have to make. But I can tell you that we see a lot of beginning producers that are doing very well starting out leasing, just as much as people that are trying to start a business, but then they're also having to make these bigger land payments. So there's certainly pros and cons to either way that you do it. Good. Well, good to hear Leah has found it too. The walkthrough videos are pretty handy. So I would encourage you to take some time to use that. And I think the last slide might just be see if there's any questions.
Great. Great. Let's stop sharing so we can all see each other. So anybody have any questions?
I had a question for you, Jessica, on that 50-50 down, or the 50-50 program. You mentioned that there was a down payment portion for Northwest's 50%, and I just was a little curious what that would look like. And
Sure.
then also, how do you look at a purchase that also involves doing like improvements as far as down payment or things that way?
So to answer your first question, the down payment generally, and if you're buying a piece of ground and it was in more of a recreational type of area, say not necessarily a straight up agricultural piece of property, those areas that are questionable in terms of, okay, is this ag or is this recreational / hunting? We're seeing a lot of that in Idaho, right? But if it's a pretty obvious, this is a farm, then we would have 20% down on that 50% that's our loan. And then that would have a USDA Farm Service Agency guarantee. If it looks like it would cash flow though, for you to maybe put less money down, if we offered a jumpstart loan for part of that 20%, we can offer up to $100,000 as a second loan with us to basically finance some of your down payment. But we don't like to do that unless at the very end, when, you know, we draw the line and say, okay, what does it look like when this is all said and done? If that doesn't look like you're going to have enough money to, you know, run your farm and feed your family and be comfortable, then we will not do that. And then your second question was on farm improvements. That's really tricky because, you know, with us, a lot of times I'll get calls, people say, boy, my fences are falling down. You know, I need new fences. Or they want to build, you know, an outbuilding. Those things are harder to write a loan for because there's no kind of asset tied to it per se, right? It's not like a mortgage where you've got a house that, or it's not cattle and that's not, you know, your collateral. So some of those improvements are a little bit tricky, but the Farm Service Agency has been pretty creative on some things with that. So they might be able to help there. Because what we're going to want to see over time is that, you know, your working capital is supposed to pay for some of those things. And that's why we don't want you to have so much debt that you don't have money to keep your place looking nice and in, you know, top shape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I should have been a little more specific. You know, with we're looking to purchase a piece of ground that's, you know, unimproved pretty much, maybe just been just kind of been sitting for a few years, or wheel lines or something that's a little less complicated, and then putting in a feed yard on it. And so that's where the income would be generated, is from building the corrals, brand new facilities. So I guess that's more what I'm looking at as far as improvements, you know, an improvement that will be generating the cash flow.
So that would be one where we would want to sit down and look at how much, you know, how much is it? Is it something that could be in an intermediate term loan, which is not a, you know, long-term 20 to 30 year real estate loan, but it's not a 1 year operating line. You know, it's something that maybe over 7 years might make sense to write a loan for. And what would we put as collateral for that? Then sometimes those types of things do work out. So it's certainly not a one size fits all.
Okay, so it would probably end up looking something like the real estate loan with you guys in the first position, FSA in the second, and then you would end up doing like the intermediate term loan, and FSA would probably subordinate that position to you guys as well.
Yeah, so we wouldn't basically write the loan amount for, you know, more money than the purchase price of that just to pay for the improvements. It would be its own, you know, separate loan, either with us or with FSA for those, for kind of getting it started. The Jumpstart loan can also help with that. That's kind of more of a catch-all that rides a lot on the borrower's character in the business plan.
Uh-huh.
That's up to $100,000. So for instance, and I know we're getting close on time, but we see a lot of fishermen and women in Alaska that have to buy a quota or permits, and they're just really not, titled and, normal. And so we'll put them in a jumpstart loan, which is a smaller loan amount, kind of like the micro loan, but it helps to put it together. Again, focusing really on the borrower's credit score, their business plan, and just their character.
Thank you. Thank you. Leah said that makes sense. Any other questions for Jesika?
I had a quick question. How does it work if the land that you'd be buying is currently enrolled in like a CRP program or like another federal program, like a fish and game habitat program? And so to farm it, you'd have to buy out that program or the.
I know they're pulling some ground out of CRP. Would it be still in it post close, or?
From what I understand, we'd have to buy out the acres of like 60 acres, and if I wanted to start with farming 30 acres of it, I'd have to buy out that 30 acres.
Okay, we would just really look at just is the loan going to be able to, or is the land going to be able to pay for itself with just those 30 acres on the 60? And obviously consider in your CRP payment with that cash flow, just see how it looks. Is there other off-farm earnings? A lot of times on deals like what you were describing earlier, you'll be making some money from still working. And most of the times when we see people get started, they've got some off-farm income, which is a really nice risk mitigator that can help in some of these situations like the one that you're describing, where you've got some money to bring to the table that's going to help with this transition, as opposed to just saying, the land has to support the operational expenses of the 30 acres plus, have 30 that's basically doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? So we had one question earlier when we started our discussion, Jesika. We recognized in the pandemic that we're seeing a lot of in-migration to the inland Northwest, and a lot of property values have increased a lot. And we're wondering if you've heard anything about whether the expectation would be that this is a blip or this is the long-term trend.
Yeah, that's $1 million question. American Farmland Trust has put on some really good webinars about this, and they've got some pretty sophisticated maps that show that, we've got someone with a land trust on the line. They're obviously intimately familiar with this, and we haven't heard if this is a blip or if this is going to be how it goes. I think we're all kind of in uncharted territory, but one of our hopes, I think, through some of this is that, we might figure out how to utilize some of these programs with land trust to bring some of these prices, down through the purchase of a conservation easement to help. But then obviously then there's the question of who's going to help with the purchase of the easement itself. Idaho really doesn't yet have a program like Washington and some other states that has grants and different things to help with that. So that's a terrific question, Colette, and I wish we had an answer, but I'm not hearing anything like, this is it. But I think everybody is saying the chances of land going down is probably highly unlikely.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, Jesika. And to let everyone know, Jesika's slides are in the Extension Campus classroom, as well as a number of handouts that she provided with more information about different programs. So you'll find that where you find the slide handout for my presentation and the recording. So thank you so much, Jesika.
Thank you.
Great to have you on. And to, we talked about building the team. We've been talking about a lot. Who's your land access team? Who's going to be on that team? And I think that you really made a great case to have FSA and a lender like Northwest Farm Credit Services on your team as you're moving forward, trying to figure these things out, that now's the time to build those relationships.
Yeah, well said. We've all got something to offer, and it's never just one thing. It's kind of like this recipe you put together. So thank you for your time, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, here's the last thing for tonight. I'm showing you, hopefully not everyone's pictures, but the homework for next week. And so next week, we're going to start looking at land assessment. And so there's some things that you can do to start that thinking process for yourself. These are all in the course classroom. So bringing out the land requirements worksheet to really start to delve in a little bit deeper about your readiness to acquire land. The land comparison worksheet is for you to look at, like if you're looking at a couple different locations. So let's say that you're comparing being around Coeur d'Alene to being closer to Sandpoint. It's to help you think through those different locations and the pros and cons of different locations, or it may be in one county to the next county. I mentioned the community support for ag checklist. Again, this is really important, especially when you're looking at using direct markets and intermediated markets. So you want to sell to grocery stores or to restaurants. So what's in the community, and how does the community support ag? Through its markets, through its policies, the general vibe of the community. Are you going to be plowing new ground like Emily and Luke? You know, what is it that exists already? So that's something that you can look at. And then you can start, you know, based on our last 3 sessions, developing your action plan for finding land, and also an action plan for acquiring land. So these are all forms, these worksheets that are to help you think through this process and to move down this road to land tenure. And then I just wanted to provide this picture of Luke and Emily on their farm 3 years ago. So this was Luke and Emily's wash station for their garden on their farm. And so you got to see last week that they have a brewery now, that building, the outdoor area. Even their grain crops were not dialed in 3 years ago. So I just thought it would be fun for everyone to kind of see where they were and where they are now. Any questions before we wrap up for tonight? Okay, I know it's a lot to take in. Thank you all for joining tonight. Next week, our guest will be Diane Green with Green Tree Naturals Farm in Sandpoint. So I look forward to connecting with you then. If you have any questions or are needing any resources, please let Mackenzie or I know. We're happy to help you. Thank you again, and good night.
Thanks, Colette.
Good luck, Greg, on your tour of
Well,
land.
thank you.
Have fun at Lone Mountain.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.